kind of really the journey of going through brain balance and really how we evaluate a child and how we help that child for the most part. So we're going to first talk about understanding the root cause and the developing brain, so we can go right into it. The right and left hemispheres, so each side of the brain has different functions, and we're going to take a look at those functions and really how they complement each other. Okay? So this is what a balanced brain looks like. Both sides of the brain are in constant communication. We have the left hemisphere and we have the right hemisphere. Okay? So you can see on the left side and the right side the different functions that they're responsible for. The left hemisphere basically is the detail side. Right? So pulling those names, dates, places, and this is when we use this really when we're reading or having a conversation. The right hemisphere is the big picture, so the moral of the story or what the conversation is even about. We know a lot of kids struggle with this. They're either really, really strong with that detail or really, really strong with the big picture, and they're lacking in the other areas. So that we need to use both sides of the brain when we're doing that. You see the verbal communication, that's the left side. The right side is the nonverbal communication. I always point out that nonverbal communication is basically our social ability, being able to read body language and facial expressions, but also being able to really communicate with our words and really express ourselves, especially with our emotions, instead of having meltdowns and tantrums and even putting our hands on others. And then we have our small muscle or our fine motor control. You know, a lot of kids that come to our program struggle with their fine motor. A lot of kids at age of 10, they have shoes that they Velcro because they can't tie shoes yet. They don't have that ability to manipulate small objects. Buttoning buttons is even hard, and handwriting is not legible. And what we see is really large spacing, gaps between the letters are crunched together and stuff like that. And then we have our gross motor. So that's our large muscle movements, basically how physically coordinated we are and how athletic and how good at sports we can be. And then we also have what is the IQ in the left hemisphere. So for the ages that we see is how well they'll perform academically. And then the EQ, the emotional intelligence. This is a big one that a lot of the kids struggle with, is just understanding their emotions. There's many other aspects that we really evaluate that contribute to this, but ultimately that right hemisphere controls that emotional intelligence and how well they understand those emotions and when to really use them and things like that. Use them in a healthy way. And then we have the logical side and the abstract side. So the logical is more black and white thinking, and then the abstract is more creativity, and more in-depth. So we have surface level thinking versus in-depth thinking. Okay? And it goes with the same at the bottom, the linear logical thinking and understanding abstract concepts. And the example I always give is a logical thinker, which would be considered basically a concrete thinker. If they were to look at the Statue of Liberty, they would just see the concrete. And then you have the abstract thinker looking at the Statue of Liberty and seeing what it actually means, the freedom and the liberty. So it's more in-depth. It's past that surface level. And then we have approachable, and we have withdrawn, pretty self-explanatory. And then we have conscious action, so being aware of our actions, and then the unconscious action, so just more like automatically doing things, not aware of it. Okay? Memory and learning is both sides of the brain. Okay? And we know a lot of kids that we see struggle with this, especially when there's an imbalance. One side's stronger while the other side's weaker. Okay? And that's causing a lot of that miscommunication, so memory and learning is pretty difficult. So a lot of the kids we see struggle academically. Okay? And then auditory processing, this is a big one. Example of this would be that ability to take on multi-step instructions. In the classroom, this is very, very important because the teacher teaches the classroom, yes, visually, but also verbally. And just being able to take on that information and process that information while not being distracted by other noises or other kids in the classroom. Okay? Tactile processing, the ability to process touch and even temperature. So too hard, too soft, and too hot and too cold. Okay? And then the same as at the bottom. So we want the brain to be balanced so they complement each other. Okay? What happens when there's an imbalance? One side of the brain will mature faster than the other side. Okay? And what happens is that side becomes stronger while the other side becomes weaker. And it just keeps doing that, which is creating a larger imbalance over time. Okay? And when that happens, that side of the brain really wants to try to take on all the functions that the other side should be doing. And it's not designed to do that. And that's why it frustrates the child's ability to learn, to make friends, to behave appropriately, control emotions, and so on and so forth. Okay? So these are the signs of an imbalance. This is what you see with a child with a left brain weakness and with a child with a right brain weakness. Okay? So diagnosis-wise, whenever we test a child that has ADHD, autism, Asperger's, they come out right weak, left strong. Okay? And this is what we always see. Families come in, they tell me, pretty much this is my child here. So we have awkward and clumsy. We have the hyperactive, the anxiousness. So that side of the brain, when it's weak, we see anxiety issues as well. Poor nonverbal communication, so not being able to read the body language and facial expressions. Impulsive and lax focus. So the right hemisphere is the brake pedal. The left hemisphere is the gas pedal. So when we have a weak brake pedal, our gas pedal is constantly going, and we're distracted by everything. We're all over the room. Okay. Poor reading comprehension, obsessive repetitive behaviors, immature social behaviors, allergies and autoimmunity. And I always point this one out. Left hemisphere activates the immune system. Right hemisphere deactivates the immune system. So there's that gas pedal and there's that brake pedal. So a lot of kids, when they have a weak brake pedal, their immune system is constantly active. When that happens, it's looking for anything that comes into the body, and it reacts to it. The immune system attacks it, and then we see things like the allergy symptoms. And then lacks interest in sports. Why? Because this is their gross motor side. Okay? So they lack an interest in sports because they're not confident in the way that they move their body and the way that it's coordinated. Okay? So we have the bilateral synchronization, the left and the right side work together. Okay? And then the poor eye contact, and then space invading. So having that spatial awareness and just being aware of ourself in space actually contributes to our body awareness. And then we have the left hemisphere. So what I've seen with this is typically dyslexia. And what also will contribute to that is a poor visual system, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the left hemisphere, you can see poor math, verbal, and spelling skills, poor reading skills, fine motor problems, poor letter recognition, poor auditory processing, the ability to process the spoken word and sound, weak immune response, poor memory for detail, misses the small details, poor self-esteem, poor motivation, and task avoidance. And I always point out, these three here really kind of work together. So if we have poor self-esteem, then obviously our motivation is going to be weak, right? And that confidence in ourselves. And then what this does is it prevents the child from going out and accomplishing things or trying new tasks and trying new things, okay? Center for Disease Control and Prevention. This is developmental delays are on the rise. So this is to give you some numbers, give you an idea. About 1 in 59 children have been identified with autism spectrum disorder. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but roughly 10 years ago it was 1 in 10,000. So this is changing pretty rapidly. And then more than 1 in 10 U.S. school-age children had received an ADHD diagnosis by a healthcare provider by 2011. And this number has changed, as reported by parents, 2016. So the percentage of children 4 to 17, which is the age we work with, is taking medication for ADHD, as reported by parents, increased in 28% by 2007 and 2011. This is on the rise as well. Okay, so what we do affects brain development. So these two pictures here, what you see is really, I call the old-fashioned way of really playing. A lot of kids now are more inclined to do this. Okay? Everything's designed to really be indoors. But when you were outdoors, what you were doing was you were engaging your environment, you were engaging the people around you, that social ability, and you were also engaging all the muscles in your body. Okay? Basically, you were resisting gravity, which is one of the main forms of stimulation to the brain. Okay? So it really actually creates a balance. So this will create an imbalance. Why? Because they're not engaging their environment, they're not engaging their muscles, their core muscles, they're not even engaging those. So it doesn't really wake the brain up. What this does is it only basically stimulates one hemisphere, and that's the left. So I always like to point out, most of our kids we see are left strong, right weak. And about 99% of them tell me that it's very difficult to take away the tablet or the video games from them. Okay? So they're constantly on that screen time, and it's only stimulating the left hemisphere, causing a larger imbalance.